God bless the Mopar engineers that are sticking Hellcat motors in everything they can. Their latest is the Dodge Ram TRX. It is ridiculous with 14 inches of wheel travel, a Hellcat motor making 702 horsepower, 35-inch tires, but what it really needs is an extra 100 horsepower. Hang on, we're going to have some fun. The new Ram TRX is FCA's latest vehicle that they've successfully stuffed the amazing Hellcat supercharged Hemi into. And boy, is it cool. If you haven't heard of Sipple's speed and performance yet, you probably will soon if you're into Mopar performance at all. Owner Jon Sipple builds bulletproof transmissions for some of the fastest Mopars out there right now, and also takes on select projects for some really ridiculous builds. Besides Hennessy, he's one of the first to get his hands on the 2021 TRX, and the goal is to boost the off-road truck's already ridiculous 702 horsepower to over 800 with a larger blower pulley, injectors, and a tune. Because hey, what's more American than overkill? It appears Sipple just couldn't wait and had already started ripping into the 2021 Ram TRX by the time I arrived. He's done a ton of Hellcats, Red Eyes, and everything else Mopar performance. But since the TRX pickup is so new, this is his first of those overpowered pickups. First up is to actually get to the engine. The TRX sits so high you have to use a step ladder or a bunch of buckets to stand on so you can lean over the fender and work on the engine. So Jon has pulled all 4 tires, which allows him to actually lower the truck on the lift. Next comes removing all the plastic covers both on top and below. That monstrosity directly below the engine cover is the air filter housing. It's gigantic, but I guess if you're bombing around in the desert or other dusty areas, you need a ton of filter media to be able to move enough air to support over 700 horsepower. And now, finally, we get to see the engine. Sipple starts unhooking all the connectors to the intake so he can get it out of the way. And as you can see, it involves a bit of mechanics yoga. This one is called downward facing, why did they put the freaking thing all the way up against the firewall pose? But it didn't take too long before Sipple had all the extra stuff out of the way and he could start pulling the blower belt so he can get to the pulley swap. The serpentine belt for the accessories is on the outside, so obviously it has to come off too. Sipple is actually changing out both the upper and lower pulleys, so the supercharger unit will have to come apart as well. Here, he unbolts the throttle body to get it out of the way. Before we get too far, Sipple takes a moment to drop in a new set of plugs. Increased boost can blow out the spark on a plug with a wide gap. He says the Hellcat and Demon cars usually have plugs gapped at 32 thousandths of an inch, but he found the stock plugs on the TRX are already gapped a little tighter at 28 thousandths. These new NGK Iridiums are gapped to 25 thousandths of an inch before screwing them in. Incidentally, they're also a colder heat range to help stave off pre-ignition with the extra boost. By the way, this little gizmo he's using to gap the plugs turns out to be a lot more accurate and easy to use than my usual method of just tapping the end of the plug on a workbench to close up the gap. I found one online that I like, and I'll post a link to it below if you want one for yourself. Anyhow, once all the plugs were gapped to 25 thousandths, Sipple found the easiest way to reach them in the Hemi is through the wheel wells. This obviously isn't possible in a Charger or a Challenger, but with the TRX, yanking the inner fender liners and going in through the bottom is the superior method versus trying to reach the plugs from the top of the engine. Hey, it's sort of like the old days working on an old square body Chevy pickup. Another quick and easy change we made is to swap out the thermostat for the cooling system. The Ram engineers decided to put in a whopping 203 degree thermostat. Our guess is they want the engine to run hotter to help with emissions. Regardless, a thermostat this high does not help generate power, so Sipple swaps it out for a more standard 185 degree thermostat. And finally, we start the process of pulling the integrated blower and intercooler. All we need to access here is the upper blower pulley, which is right there in front of the unit. It's really tempting to put an impact on the pulley bolt and give it a few ugga-duggas until it comes off. But Sipple strongly warns against that. Turns out there are plastic bushings in the bearing assembly and whatnot in behind that pulley. And he says if you try to reinstall the pulley with an impact, you'll break stuff. Instead, the blower has to come apart so you can remove the blower snout, then lock it down so you can remove the pulley carefully using hand tools only. There are two different lengths of bolts across the top of the blower unit. The shorter bolts connect the blower hat to the intercooler, while the longer bolts connect both the hat and the intercooler to the cylinder heads below. At the very back, the longer bolts can't be totally removed because of interference with sheet metal below the windshield. This would have thrown me for a loop, but it wasn't an issue for Sipple. The long bolts don't have to come all the way out, they just need to be held up out of the heads, so he cranks some zip ties around each bolt to hold them up out of the way. About this time, we called it a night, and Sipple was back to work again the next morning before I was able to get back to his shop. At this point, he's got the blower drive off, but that's no big deal. I'll show you all the details as it goes back together. Now, as I previously mentioned, the blower drive has to come off in order to remove the blower pulley. That's because we use the pins on the back of the drive which engage with the blower itself. Sipple has fabricated a plate he places in a vise which engages the pins and locks the drive shaft so it can't spin. Then, he safely unbolts the blower pulley with no damage to the unit. We're installing a GripTech by ZPE pulley in its place. The new pulley has a separate hub that threads onto the blower drive first.
Now what I always do before I torque it is I make sure the pulley actually clears the snout. Yep, good daylight there. Some of these snouts, the shaft's sunk in and that pulley will actually rub this. So I have shims that I put under there if that happens.
Once he determines there's enough clearance between the pulley and the snout, he torques the hub to 34 foot-pounds. Then the pulley can go on. Sipple likes the GripTech pulleys because they put a texture on the ribs that grabs the belt without damaging it. This helps eliminate slippage, and he says that actually translates into more boost. The pulley attaches to the hub using several smaller bolts, each painstakingly torqued to 62 inch-pounds. And here you can see the new, slightly smaller pulley, which measures in at 3.10 inches in diameter, compared to the original, which is a little over 3 1/3 inches. To remove the blower snout and to get it back on, the blower unit doesn't have to come off, but the front does need to be lifted a bit. You can see that he's using a bungee cord to hold up the blower lid, but what you can't see is Sipple also has a small piece of a 2x4 board between the blower and the Hemi block to lift it up. The 2x4 is on purpose. It's strong enough to stand up to the task, but it won't scratch either the block or the blower. And then once he has the blower snout back in place, the bolts are tightened to 220 inch-pounds. Good, yeah, perfect. Once that's done, he can remove the 2x4 and gently lower the blower back into place. But before the blower hat goes back down, Sipple reinstalls the bypass valve seal. Then the blower hat can be gently lowered back into position and everything bolted down and torqued to 75 inch-pounds. To make more power, we're going to need more fuel. So while he's working around the top of the engine, Sipple pulls the stock injectors, that's one of them on the left, for a set from Injector Dynamics. The stock units are, I think, 600 cc's or so, and the new ones going in are rated at 1,050 cc's of flow per minute. And while we're at it, the stock 92mm throttle body can go back into place. Next, Sipple raised the truck back up on the lift and set about pulling the stock balancer and pulleys. Here's the stock unit. The bottom section is the blower pulley and the top is for the accessory drive belt. And here is the SFI rated ATI damper and pulley that will go in its place. You can see that it's larger than the stock pulley at 8.9 inches in diameter, which results in overdriving the blower 10% faster. ATI says that's worth 3 more pounds of boost, but since we've already installed a smaller upper pulley as well, we're looking at even more boost. However, to get the bigger pulley to fit, we've got to grind back a little bit on this mounting bracket, as well as the top of a couple of bolts to shorten up the heads just a bit. Sipple makes sure to tape off the crank snout and front seal so no metal shavings will be able to worm their way in where they're not wanted. The ATI damper is a 2-piece unit, so Sipple installs just the hub first. The stock Hellcat engine doesn't use a keyway on the crank, so the lower pulley is supposed to be kept from spinning just by the press fit. But that's not always a dependable solution when you start spinning the blower harder. Since we're going to be pumping up the boost and the stock pulley is off anyway, Sipple will be installing a crank key that will guarantee the new pulley cannot slip. Here you can see he's already slid in a jig that helps him drill a hole half in the snout of the crank and half in the damper hub. Sipple bolts it down tight so it won't spin and hits it with a drill. Notice he's got tape on the bit to mark exactly how deep he wants to drill the hole. Now with the jig out of the way, you can see how the hole Sipple just drilled cuts into both the snout of the crank and the hub of the damper. Once any metal shavings are blown out, Sipple can knock in the hardened crank key. I think it's about 3/8 of an inch or so. But now there is no way the blower pulley can slip on the crank snout. A new crank bolt will also help hold everything in place. It has to be torqued to an incredible 239 pounds. Then the damper can be bolted up to the hub along with the new accessory drive pulley, and we're ready to start putting things together. Sipple swapped out the stock serpentine blower belt for one of Gates's signature green heavy-duty belts that last longer and hold up better on the grippy surface on the ribs of the upper pulley we installed. He starts with both the blower and the accessory drive belts on the bottom, then he lowers the TRX back on the ground to get to the top half. What I didn't show is Sipple has already gone through the voodoo and whatever's necessary to break into the OEM computer so he can load in his own tune. As I've mentioned, he believes he can easily get an extra 100 horsepower out of the changes, but he wants to be able to do that while still burning 93 octane pump gas and maintaining good street manners. Easier said than done. What I'm not showing you, because honestly I didn't hang around for it, was a day of street driving to fine-tune the tune-up and get everything dialed in to Sipple's expectations. But I definitely did come back around when Sipple took the TRX over to Mass Acceleration Motorsports in Denver, North Carolina. Before he began the build, Sipple brought the truck to Mass Acceleration for a baseline dyno and got 560 peak horsepower at the rear wheels. Now, if you consider a 20% drivetrain loss, that adds up to Ram's advertised 702 horsepower at the crank, especially since Sipple had to remove the front drive shaft to disable the truck's full-time four-wheel drive system for the dyno. And this big boy barely fits on the dyno. Still, after a few minutes, we had the TRX in position, strapped down, and ready to make some pulls. So, let's let her rip. And the result? Pretty impressive if you ask me. We were burning 93 octane pump gas just like before, and the boost is now 16.5, up 5.5 from the 11 pounds we saw stock. And the power? The TRX went from 540 horsepower to 640 at the rear wheels. That's going to be somewhere around 800 horsepower at the crank. Also, torque is now 621 foot-pounds, which translates to something close to 775 at the crank. That should make a difference when it comes to spinning all four of those big 35-inch tires. Now time to have some fun. Hey, thanks for watching. Let us know if you think 100 extra horsepower is something you'd feel on a TRX. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to check out the rest we've got on the Horsepower Monster.